Hello, welcome back everybody. Have to show my face because of the YouTube anti-AI algorithm detection thing. All right, now to get into the actual video. Welcome back everybody. PayPal, Patreon, and YouTube Super whatever links are down below if you want to support me. Only do so if you actually can. Now it's time for the monthly oil demand levels update. Some countries only released monthly compiled data from before the Iran war started, whereas some have released preemptively updated numbers earlier than they otherwise would have 3 weeks plus into the war, allowing us to see visible demand destruction because of the explosion of oil prices since then. So, starting with the largest oil consumer, the US, fluctuating around 20 million barrels per day for the last 20 plus years or so, was at around or a bit above 21 before the Iran war started and has seen a contraction with the rising prices since then. Gasoline consumption in the US, in particular, being the most elastic or having the most demand elasticity. It's usually around 9 and was in particular at 9.2 before the war started. Now, 3 weeks later, it's down by 500,000 to 8.7. And jet fuel demand in the US have restabilized in the upper ones, close to 2, and pre-war was around 1.8. Since then, in the 3 weeks after, it's declined down to around 1.6. So the US now coming in closer back down to 20. China was at about 17, where its demand has been plateauing before the war, and they have not given the most recent updated data, but their data as of 2 weeks into the war showed that they had at that point declined by about 250,000 down to 16.75. India has not given any post Iran war numbers yet. So we only have that they were at 5.89 before the price spikes started. Japan, and having been going down in oil consumption long term over time as they shifted over the decades towards mass public transit, as the fuel efficiency upsurge really took hold, and as their population has continued aging out of work and out of activity. Once being up at about 6 million barrels per day decades ago, Japan is now usually a bit over 3.5. And just before the Iran war started, they were at 3.57 so far, 3 plus weeks into the war with the price spikes and supply deficits that have come from it. They have contracted in demand by about 500,000, going down from 3.57 to 3.08 million barrels per day. Russia does not have post war beginning data yet for the Iran war, that is, but their demand was already decently lower than it had been before the Ukraine war started, before they invaded Ukraine, and the economic fallout from that had hit, and they had dropped from closer to 4 down to oscillating between the upper twos and lower threes. They had been around 2.8 more recently, but over the last month or two, they've climbed back up in domestic consumption closer to 3.1 million barrels per day. South Korea in present day has plateaued out and is averaging about 2.8 usually. And given their demographic pyramid setup, they're going to be following Japan's downward direction soon. Before the Iran war started 3 weeks ago, they had jumped up a bit over 3 in demand, having one of their upward spikes to 3.08. In the 3 weeks since the war began and the price spikes that came along with it, they have dropped down to 2.6. Saudi Arabia fluctuating between 2 and 3 million barrels per day of domestic consumption over the course of any given year, higher in the summer as their electricity demand goes higher, and about a third of their electricity is still generated from oil-fired power plants. Before the war started, they were at their lower point of the year, obviously, as it was the middle of winter. They were down at 2.07. As of now, 3 weeks into the war, their domestic consumption is down to around a bit above 1.6 million barrels per day. Brazil, only pre war data, and they came in right at about 2.5 million barrels per day, which is right within their modern range. Canada, only pre war data, and they came in right within their normal 2.5 range on the lower end of it at 2.35 million barrels per day of consumption. Indonesia, only pre-demand destruction data. They're up into the lower, sometimes mid twos now for their domestic consumption. And most recently, before the war started, they came in at 2.12. Germany, once up at 3, has declined over time, like Japan, down to averaging more around 2 now. Pre-war, they were at 2.02, and they've seen a demand drop domestically over the last 3 weeks of about 250,000. So that will put them now at 1.77. Iran, in present day, normally has a domestic consumption level of close to 2, usually around 1.8. And just before the war, it was at 1.6. Now, 3 weeks into the war domestically, Iran's domestic consumption has collapsed by over half, down to around only 700,000 barrels per day, because economic activity in Iran has obviously mostly stopped across most of the country, and not a lot of people are really driving around or flying around or going anywhere or doing anything. Mexico was once up at 2 million domestically for consumption. They crashed down to 1 during COVID, and it took a really long time to get back up to near pre-COVID demand levels. And up until the war started, they were in the lower 1.8s range. But over the last 3 weeks or so, they've declined by about 100,000 down to 1.72. France only has pre war data, and they were right within their normal range, just a bit below it, coming in at 1.48 million barrels per day. The UK also only pre Iran war data, and they were also just a bit down at the lower end of their normal range in present day, coming in at 1.38 million barrels per day. Italy, once up at 2, has declined down to around 1.3 in present day. Now looks like they're starting to come in closer to 1.2 more consistently. This time in particular, pre-Iran war, they were at 1.15. Spain is normally around 1.3, and their data is pre-war as well. They were at 1.24 before everything started. Turkey in present day is up to about 1.3 on average, and their data is pre-war. They were at 1.25 million barrels per day. Singapore peaked up around 1.4 million barrels per day and has declined down closer to 1.2 for their average, and they were right at 1.2 before everything started, and now they're down somewhere between 1 and 1.1. Thailand has been plateauing out in present day around 1.2, and before everything started, they were at 1.18. Now 3 weeks into everything, they've contracted down to close to 1. The UAE has a domestic consumption level, their own oil demand of about 1.2 in present day, which is part of why they were so eager to bump their production plateau from 3 million up to 4 million so they could expand their export ratio again. Since the war began, over the last 3 weeks, their domestic consumption has collapsed from 1.2 down to now fluctuating between 500 and 600,000 barrels per day. Australia only has pre-war data. In present day, they're up to around 1.1, and just before everything started, they were at 1.06. Nederland, in present day, has declined down from 1 million down to around 900,000. And most recently, they had come in a bit down from that, even at 815. That was before any of the demand destruction started yet, though. Iraq, in present day, is up to usually around 1 million barrels per day of domestic consumption, and not their absolute most recent data into the war, but a little ways into it. Their demand had gone down by about 100,000 up to that point, at 900,000 barrels per day. Taiwan, in present day, had held a plateau of about 1 million for a couple decades, but over the 2020s, they had declined down to between 850 and 900. Most recently, pre-war, they were at 825, but in the price spikes since the war began, they have declined over the last 3 weeks down to right around 700,000. Egypt in present day had almost reached 1 million barrels per day. They got really close to it recently, and just before the war started, they were coming back down from it a little bit and were down to 963,000. It looks like now, 3 weeks into the war, they have contracted in demand down under 800. Poland only has pre-war data where they were at 701,000. Belgium only has pre-war data where they were at 624. The Philippines saw one of the stronger demand contractions. Pre-war, they were at about 480, and since then, they have contracted down by about 100,000 or by about 20% to 388,000 barrels per day. Colombia in present day is up in the 500,000s usually for their domestic consumption, and right up to when everything started, they were at about 547. Algeria, also before everything started, was down at 454. In present day, they've grown up to domestic consumption of usually around 500,000. Chile, before everything began, was close to their average. They plateaued out at about 400 in present day, and they were at 375. Sweden, pre-war, was at 268. Greece in present day is also usually at about 300, and their data is also pre-war. They came in at 295 right before everything started. Romania in present day, usually around 250, and theirs is also from before everything started. They came in at 259. Portugal is also usually at about 250, and before everything started, they came in decently down at 196. And then there's the club of countries who all average right around 200, usually some a bit over it, some a bit underneath, and all of their data is from before everything started. Austria came in at 208. Czech Republic at 204. Hungary, even outside of the Iran war, before everything started, they were way down at 142. Switzerland was at 185. Finland was down at 160. And Norway was at 198. All right, that's it for this one. Thank you, everybody, for sticking around and listening. Like if you enjoyed, subscribe if you haven't already. PayPal and Patreon are down there if you want to support me. Only do so if you actually can. There's a link in the description to a Drive folder with these graphs and all kinds of other graphs across all kinds of different subjects. That's free to access, free to use at any time. There's a link in the top pinned comment to my cat's YouTube channel. May God bless and protect all of you, and I will see you all around next time.